March 28, 1942. The morning air was bitterly cold and heavy with dampness along the French coast at Saint-Nazaire. Captain Karl Conrad Mecca stood alone on the front deck of what remained of a British destroyer, his breath forming small white clouds in the chill as he watched German engineers carefully crawl through the twisted wreckage far below him. The ship sat wedged deep and firmly into the massive steel gates of the Normandy dry dock, her bow crushed and crumpled inward like paper that had been balled up tightly in someone's fist. Thin columns of gray smoke still drifted lazily upward from stubborn fires that continued burning somewhere deep in the dark metal belly of the vessel. All around him on the deck and along the dock, German officers stood in small groups, talking casually and confidently about salvage plans and detailed repair schedules, their voices carrying easily across the quiet morning air of the busy French harbor. Not a single one of them had even the slightest idea that they had less than 12 hours left to live. The ship beneath their boots was HMS Campbeltown, and she was secretly the largest floating bomb that had ever successfully entered a German-controlled port anywhere in occupied Europe. The daring attack had come in total darkness just hours before dawn. At exactly 1:34 that morning, Campbeltown had charged aggressively up the Loire River estuary at a sustained 17 knots, her sharp, reinforced bow aimed like a deadly arrow straight at the gates of the only dry dock on the entire Atlantic coast, big enough to properly service Germany's massive and powerful battleship Tirpitz. British commandos had fought fiercely and desperately for hours immediately after the violent ramming, battling from building to building in brutal close-quarters combat while specialized demolition teams worked frantically against time to systematically destroy critical pumping stations and essential machinery throughout the dock complex. By sunrise, after intense fighting, the Germans had finally managed to push them back toward the harbor entrance. 169 British soldiers and sailors now lay dead, scattered across the dock area and floating in the cold harbor water. Another 215 exhausted survivors were now prisoners, being roughly processed and intensively questioned by German intelligence officers. The Germans were already confidently calling the entire operation a complete failure, a desperate and extremely costly move by the British that had achieved absolutely nothing of permanent strategic value. Sure, the destroyer was stuck firmly and deeply in the gates, but that was really just a straightforward salvage problem, not any kind of strategic disaster. The dock could be systematically cleared of debris. The damage could be methodically repaired by skilled engineers. Everything could be carefully put back to normal within months. Captain Mecca walked slowly and thoughtfully along the entire length of the damaged ship, stopping occasionally to examine specific damage and take detailed mental notes for his official report to headquarters. The vessel had been very heavily and cleverly modified specifically for this suicide raid. Her forward gun turrets were completely gone and removed, replaced instead with sheets of thin armor plating welded into place. Her entire profile and silhouette had been deliberately and carefully altered to make her look almost exactly like a German torpedo boat from a distance, a remarkably clever disguise that had actually worked absolutely perfectly until Campbeltown was already deep inside the harbor defenses, and it was far too late to stop her deadly approach. Smart and resourceful, Mecca thought to himself admiringly. The British were always extremely resourceful and endlessly creative with limited resources. But being clever and bold without actually winning the battle was ultimately just a tragic waste of good men and valuable equipment. Down below deck in the dark interior, Captain Lothar Burhen personally supervised the first detailed inspection of the damaged interior spaces. The engine rooms were completely destroyed and gutted, the massive boilers now stone-cold and silent. Multiple fires had systematically gutted several compartments throughout the ship. British demolition charges had methodically and systematically wrecked what the concentrated German guns had somehow missed during the intense battle. The ship was essentially just floating scrap metal now, good only for recycling and melting down once they finally managed to cut her free from the damaged gates. What absolutely none of them could see, what none of them even remotely suspected for a moment, were the 4.5 tons of powerful high explosives packed extremely carefully into specially designed steel-encased chambers positioned deep in the hull, cunningly and expertly hidden behind what appeared to any inspector to be completely normal fuel tanks and ordinary structural support beams. The brilliant British engineers had systematically turned Campbeltown into a sophisticated floating bomb so advanced and so carefully designed that even the most careful and thorough professional inspection would reveal absolutely nothing wrong, nothing out of place, nothing even remotely suspicious to trained eyes. The massive explosive charges were precisely and methodically arranged in exactly 24 separate depth charge cases, each individual one filled completely to capacity with high-grade military explosive material. The ingenious trigger system was elegantly simple in concept, but absolutely brilliant and foolproof in its practical design and execution. Pencil detonators, small cylindrical devices no bigger than a writing pen that used concentrated acid slowly eating through thin copper wire to eventually set off the massive main explosion. Once they were carefully activated back in England before departure, absolutely nothing on Earth could stop them from eventually firing. No amount of careful searching or thorough inspection would find them in time. No amount of military caution or professional suspicion would prevent what was now inevitably coming for everyone on and near the ship. The carefully calibrated fuses had been meticulously set by specialists before Campbeltown even left England on her final one-way mission across the Channel. 8 hours absolute minimum delay, possibly several hours longer depending on the ambient temperature and specific environmental conditions inside the hull. The corrosive acid was already steadily and inexorably eating through the wire, molecule by molecule, bringing everyone closer to death with each passing second. By mid-morning, with the sun climbing higher, German confidence had grown considerably and noticeably. The British prisoners were being efficiently processed according to standard procedure and sent away to prison camps. The dead were being respectfully counted, identified when possible, and prepared for burial. The stubborn fires still burning in isolated pockets aboard Campbeltown were finally coming under control as firefighting teams made progress. Senior officers from the prestigious Marine engineering staff arrived from other regional facilities to carefully and professionally assess the serious damage to the massive dock gates and develop a comprehensive, detailed plan for the complex salvage operation ahead. This was completely routine work for experienced and skilled men. Difficult and time-consuming, certainly, but nothing they had not successfully handled many times before during this long war. Captain Mecca officially authorized a full inspection team of specialists to board the destroyer and begin their detailed technical work immediately. The experienced engineers would need to thoroughly understand exactly how she was originally constructed and how she had been modified before they could safely cut her free, without causing dangerous secondary damage to the gates or dock. Skilled welders would need to work very carefully and methodically around any remaining fuel tanks and any potentially unexploded ammunition stores that might still be hidden somewhere in the wreckage. The absolute last thing anyone wanted was some kind of accidental explosion during the delicate and dangerous salvage work. The bitter irony of that particular concern would have been darkly funny if anyone had somehow survived long enough to fully appreciate it later. Chief Petty Officer Heinz Müller, a veteran with 15 years of naval engineering experience, led a small team of trusted specialists into the forward sections of the ship, carefully measuring bulkheads and methodically checking whether the overall damaged structure was still stable enough for safe cutting work. The British had originally built the ship decades earlier during the First World War at an American shipyard. She was genuinely old and outdated, obviously worn down from hard service, her metal plates visibly fatigued and weakened from countless years of brutal Atlantic service in all kinds of terrible weather conditions. But the basic construction was solid American design, built to last for decades. Muller noted carefully in his detailed inspection log that the British had received her through the Lend-Lease program, one of 50 old destroyers transferred back in 1940 as part of the crucial deal between America and Britain. He ran his bare, calloused hand slowly along a cold interior bulkhead, carefully feeling the slightly damp surface for any signs of weakness or damage. That innocent-looking metal wall concealed exactly 400 pounds of high explosives, positioned just 3 feet away from his fingertips at that exact moment. The metal felt cold and slightly damp from the morning air, drifting through the many damaged sections of the hull. Nothing felt even slightly unusual to his experienced touch. Nothing seemed remotely suspicious or out of place. Nothing triggered any alarm or concern in his experienced and well-trained mind. Up in the comfortable dock master's office overlooking the entire basin area, various staff officers sat around a large table discussing realistic repair timelines and resource requirements. The massive gate would definitely need complete replacement, not just repair. That much was painfully obvious to everyone involved. But the dock structure itself, the foundation and walls, appeared basically intact and structurally sound overall. The British demolitions had certainly damaged some pumping equipment and destroyed various pieces of important machinery, but the fundamental structure, the massive foundation and reinforced concrete walls, all seemed perfectly solid and repairable. 6 months of focused work with proper resources, they estimated confidently, maybe 8 months at the absolute outside. By autumn, certainly by early winter at the latest, the critically important Normandy dock would be fully operational again and ready to service the largest and most important ships in the entire German Navy. They were completely and tragically wrong in every assumption, but none of them would live long enough to discover their fatal mistake. By noon, with the sun now high overhead, more than 40 German military personnel were either on board Campbeltown or positioned immediately around her on the surrounding dock area. Experienced engineers crawled methodically through her cramped and damaged compartments with measuring tools and clipboards, documenting everything. Skilled welders carefully prepared their cutting equipment and planned their technical approach. Senior officers stood casually on the angled deck in the sunshine, discussing and debating the best technical approach to safely remove her from the gates without causing the whole damaged structure to collapse catastrophically. A substantial crowd had gradually gathered on the dock itself throughout the morning, a diverse mix of curious French civilian workers and off-duty German soldiers, all watching the fascinating salvage preparations with genuine professional interest and curiosity about the wrecked British ship. Nobody paid any attention whatsoever to the fact that deep inside the dark hull, the corrosive acid had almost completely eaten through the last thin strand of copper wire, holding back destruction. At exactly 12:35 in the afternoon, precisely 11 hours and 1 minute after Campbeltown had violently rammed into the gates at full speed, HMS Campbeltown exploded with absolutely catastrophic and devastating force. The massive blast was beyond anything anyone present had imagined possible from a ship. 4.5 tons of high explosive detonated simultaneously in a single devastating instant that changed everything. The enormous force shot forward directly into the steel gates and exploded violently outward in all directions into the surrounding dock area. The destroyer's entire hull simply disintegrated into millions of razor-sharp pieces. Jagged metal fragments weighing hundreds of pounds each flew through the air at incredible supersonic speed, like deadly oversized missiles launched in every direction. The entire forward section of the ship simply stopped existing in any recognizable form, instantly turned to superheated vapor and gas in the initial shock wave that radiated outward. Captain Mecca died instantly and painlessly, along with absolutely everyone else who was anywhere on board the ship. The officers standing casually on deck talking were violently torn apart before their nervous systems could even begin to register what was happening to them. The engineers working below deck in the dark were instantly crushed completely flat as heavy bulkheads collapsed inward on top of them with tremendous force. Chief Petty Officer Muller and his entire trusted inspection team were literally atomized, their bodies converted into their most basic constituent elements in a tiny fraction of a second. The massive blast wave exploded outward in all directions faster than the speed of sound itself. Men who had been standing casually on the dock watching were violently picked up and thrown through the air like children's toys. The large crowd of curious onlookers was instantly cut down where they stood, bodies catastrophically broken by the pure pressure wave itself before any of the flying metal fragments even reached them. Windows shattered simultaneously across the entire port facility. Solid stone buildings located a full quarter-mile away suddenly lost their roofs. The massive steel gates, those enormous, carefully engineered structures specifically designed to hold back the entire Atlantic Ocean itself, were utterly and completely destroyed. Not damaged, not cracked or weakened. Completely destroyed beyond any possibility of repair. The northern gate was blown completely off its massive foundation and hurled bodily into the dry dock basin like a discarded toy. The southern gate was instantly twisted into completely worthless scrap metal, its structural integrity and strength utterly obliterated. The explosion had accomplished in a single second what wave after wave of British bombing raids had totally failed to achieve in dozens of previous costly attempts. The strategic impact was immediate and profound. With Saint-Nazaire completely out of commission, Tirpitz could not risk Atlantic operations. The massive battleship spent the rest of the war hiding in Norwegian fjords, a powerful ship made strategically useless by the destruction of a single dock. The British had changed the balance of the naval war with one old ship and 4.5 tons of explosives. At 12:35 on March 28, 1942, the acid finished eating through the wire. The circuit completed. The detonators fired, and the German engineers learned the terrible truth in the last fraction of a second of their lives. The ship was not a wrecked destroyer at all. It was the most successful bomb of the entire war.